So we've recognized that the community is diverse, but the interpreting field is less so. So for today, I'd like to start with a provocation. Do we understand other people? And do others understand us? And that's a really important question. And it's important to consider that question carefully. So when we're looking at the field of sign language translation, we are working from a source text, which is either written or spoken English, that we are translating into a signed text, usually on video. And that signed text is for a deaf audience. That audience comes from a minority group, and outsiders look at that group as being disabled. So why is that translation important? Because of the barriers that exist to that majority language. In terms of many deaf people, their education has been limited. They have faced a number of barriers throughout their lives, some of which will have experienced language deprivation from childhood to adulthood. So what happens within that translation process? People will use a mix of interpreting and translation practices in order to provide that translation. For a deaf person working as a translator, they will use their cultural and lived experience, and they will apply that to their work. They will look at what different people use, what different people need in their communication. Translations are always something that are prepared in advance, so individuals have time to unpack the information and prepare before they film themselves doing the translation. Those translations are permanent because they are recorded. So it allows people to look at them online. It allows them to pause and go back and look at features of the translation again, which applies to whatever their need might be. So this is why translations are valuable for the deaf community. But when we're looking at translations, who are they really for? When you are preparing and presenting your translations, who is your audience? Who are you thinking about? I'd like to give some examples of 3 different people, just to get a sense of their backgrounds, and just to let you know that they are invented people, but they are representative of the diversity of the deaf community. So I'm going to talk about these 3 individuals, their language acquisition and experience, and I'd like you to think about those 3 people and how you would translate and target them individually. So the first person is Colin, a deaf man in his 50s. He grew up in a hearing family, went to a deaf school where signing was not allowed within the classroom. So he acquired sign language from his peers within the school environment. Within his career, he has worked in a manual occupation as a joiner. He is married, but his ability to write and read English is limited. So for both him and his wife, in order to access written English text, they would go to their local deaf society and request a translation. The second person is a young woman called Sarah. Her parents were hearing, but as soon as Sarah was diagnosed as deaf as a baby, the parents straight away began to learn Auslan, which meant that Sarah had access to communication from a young age. She also has a younger sister who can also sign. Sarah is at university studying medicine. In order for her to access the curriculum, she has sign language interpreters working with her. Other deaf people are very impressed with Sarah's bilingual nature in both sign language and English. The third person is a young boy, a deaf boy, who is around 17, whose name is John. He also has hearing parents, but when he was born, his parents were not advocates of encouraging the use of sign language. His parents weren't aware of the advantages of having that language acquisition. John was mainstreamed, the only deaf person within that environment with no access to language. Within the classroom, he had to follow an oralist environment, so struggled to access the curriculum. He's not somebody who will be going to university like Sarah. He's more likely to end up in a manual role like John. But John has been out and about and had the opportunity to meet other young deaf people like him of a similar age, and has started to access sign language. But he's not able to follow sign language fluently. He tends to follow it from a more of an English stance. But he is viewed as being positive in terms of his access to sign language, but the community want him to be part of their community and want to encourage him to be involved because they feel that that will enhance his future life opportunities. So the three people that I have described are represented very commonly within the Australian deaf community. And I wonder if that may be the case also for the New Zealand deaf community. All of them have been raised in hearing families, but their learning of their language trajectory has been very different. Sometimes people will describe people with limited sign language as having a low language, and it's not about that. It's about them having a different journey, a different trajectory. So in summary, this is what we are saying. There is a lot of variation in sign language use. It can be a mix, a mesh of sign language and visual representation of spoken language. So there are different linguistic and communicative repertoires. And the reason for that is variable. It can be in terms of access to deaf people, to communication. It can be a reflection of their education. It can also be a reflection of migration. We also have to consider that many children have experienced language deprivation, and that has lifelong consequences. We're just going to change interpreters, bear with us.
I'd like to continue by introducing this principle to you. On the slide, it says the nascency principle, under which there's a definition. So even though this may be new to you, in a way it's somewhat obvious. I just think the useful thing is to name it. So take a look at the definition. And as you remember from what I've said about the three people that I've described to you, if we think about Sarah in particular, this works in terms of we think about her university studies. She wants to study medicine. At the moment, to study medicine at university, there may be very, very few people who've ever done that. There may be a few interpreters in Australia who may know how to work with the content of a medical degree in sign language. Probably less likely, they're probably much more experienced at working in community settings in healthcare, but actually to provide access in an educational setting at degree level, they're going to have to constantly find new vocabulary in sign language, invent vocabulary to communicate with Sarah in lectures. When Sarah completes her degree, and those interpreters no longer work at the university with her, then what happens? Essentially, everything that happened there and then is gone. And so for the next student who comes to study medicine, you start all over again. And interpreters are brought in, and they have to go through the same process of finding vocabulary, understanding the content, and you start again. So what's going on here is described by the nascency principle, where we don't see enduring features and use of the language and the vocabulary in any persistent form. This also has an impact on how sign language translations are created. So I am going to be further talking about the situation in Australia. There are existing English to Auslan translations, probably since the 2000s. From 2009 onwards, I would say these became much more common. We saw many more, a sort of mainstreaming of having Auslan translations available. In 2014, the deaf community in Australia were looking at a variety of translations online and had increasing concerns about some of the quality, the variability, the intelligibility of these translations. So a research project was established to look at online recordings and try to understand what were the good things to keep and what were the less good things to avoid. With online video translations, are they accessible to all Auslan users? Could Colin, could John understand all of these translations? That was the sort of approach we were taking when we looked at these. The research project involved all sorts of people, and you can see them named on the slide here in the research team and steering committee. So firstly, I'd like to show you what were we looking at, these Auslan translations that were available at the time. So there is a link to the video. I'm going to try and screen share, but if the internet connection from me to you doesn't let these videos show too easily, then Fran has a link that can go in the chat. You could then click on that link yourselves and play it locally to you at your end. Let's see how we go. Good. I'm glad you've had opportunity to look through those videos. That illustrates the examples of translations that we found, and you can see that there isn't a great deal of consistency there. There's all sorts of different types of translation across a number of subject areas. Also, the people who are involved, and of course, audiences. So thinking about those clips and those examples, they come from pre-2014. Here we are in 2021. Things will be different. But I think it's useful to see what we had then in 2014 and what things look like in those examples. So in the research project, we wanted to count how many translations were available. We found 180 translations online. Most of them have been produced by state deaf societies, otherwise other organizations, businesses. And they included all sorts of topics: deaf society information, instructional videos, working with home fire alarms, installation of fire and smoke alarms, governmental information, annual reports, emergency information. So quite a variety there. Some also children's books. Most of the presenters of these videos were deaf. Just a few were hearing. Typically, the hearing people involved were working with an audio source to produce a translation rather than text. We also recognized that some of them were a team effort, and they were a team effort that would involve at least a couple of people working together. Most of these videos also included on-screen captioning. These would be either open or closed. Most of them were, in fact, open captions, meaning the viewer had no control over whether they were visible or not. And also these videos included other moving or still images, and sometimes other text information on screen at the same time. So all of this going on whilst there was an on-screen Auslan presenter too. So what we then did with all these videos to find out what people thought about them and how effective and suitable they were is worked in our research team. Steph, Linda and I, we flew all over Australia. We went to 5 large cities, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. And in each, we had 2 focus groups. We would have a focus group of deaf people who were viewing the translations, and a focus group that had those who worked as translators, which was a mix of deaf and hearing people. So we had 2 focus groups in every one of the 5 cities. Steph and I would then visit to meet the groups. We'd show them our example videos, ask them to watch through, and then we would hold a discussion. We had questions that we were looking to find answers for, to ask, who do you think the audience is for this video? What do you think about the quality of the signing? What about the technical quality, the presentation on screen? And for those working as translators, what's your experience of the translation process? What do you think was used? We did this because we wanted to know what were best practices. So we have more than 20 hours of discussion time here. And when we put together everything from our focus group findings, we then put that into annotation and software to begin our analysis. And we found a number of themes discussed. You can see them listed here on the slide. So, for example, people talked about audience. People talked about if you had on screen a number of things visible at the same time in different places, whether that was text, captions, and an Auslan interpreter, what effect did that have? So in the research team, we then produced a report. This is available to you to read at any time you like. Here it is. And these formed guidelines as the first step to working towards best practice. So knowing that that's a brief overview of the research we did, I think the important thing is to focus for this evening on just a few things. So I'm going to focus on the main problems with existing translations, thinking about audiences, captioning, and what works well. But I expect you'd like to know, what did people say in their focus groups? And it was really, really interesting. And people didn't really hold back. People really said what they thought. So I can share with you what they said. We're just going to change to Susan interpreting now.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to show you a number of quotes which reflected what was discussed in those groups in regards to the translations that they observed. So the text that you'll see was originally presented in Auslan, but of course for confidentiality we can't present those original videos, so we've translated them into English. So this deaf person is saying that their friend has a limited English repertoire, so the video would not be understandable to them, and they would need more Auslan expression, which the video didn't reflect. Here they said that if they were watching the video, it's likely that they would stop and ask that person to explain it to them. If I sign normally to my friend, they will not understand. I will need to change my signing to connect to their life experience. A problem for people like us who are working in community services is that we may show the video to our clients, but if they do not understand, then we need to re-explain it again and again. I think about if a deaf person came into our organization, and if they'd experienced the topic being reflected in the video, what would they say? How would they say it? It wouldn't be in the way that the video has been reflected. Some people take time to understand concepts. Even concepts that we would understand quickly, they would take more time, so they would benefit from a slower explanation and repetition. If I'm watching a video, I would like to think I could sit with a cup of tea and watch it. It doesn't feel like that with this one. It is really difficult for one video to be suitable for all deaf audiences. If a video has a presenter using Auslan and captions, I am distracted. If there are captions and they don't align with the signing, it confuses me. If the caption is wrong or the sign is wrong, I find that frustrating. If I'm not familiar with the presenter and their use of Auslan, the captions provide some kind of backup. I think that the videos are a waste of time because a deaf person who can read can access both captions and the signing, but those who cannot will be confused with having both of those things represented, so it's a waste. I know that presenter, and they are one of the best interpreters. But in this case, they don't do well. The video is too fast and with too much information. This presenter has beautiful Auslan and facial expression in this video. I think it should be possible to let the viewer have the preference in the same way that they would with television or the internet, is that they can choose between Auslan or Aslan plus captions. I've seen work overseas of deaf presenters doing translation in an interview style, and I like that format. Australians should do more of that. Translations must be three things: natural, clear, and accurate. So I've presented a number of quotes that we gained from our research project, things that were discussed within the research groups. And there were a number of different views being expressed. Many of the concerns were negative, but there are also some positive comments. And I hope it's enabled you to begin thinking about the potential problems when you're moving from a source language of English into Auslan. So the main issues I will now capture for you. If a video has some pre-existing English captions that need to be translated in Auslan, they drive that content. They have an influence. Another comment is that sometimes the Auslan and the English are competing, and primarily it's the English that tends to win. There are incidences within some of the Auslan translations where there are English strategies which are acceptable, such as fingerspelling generally, but within the videos, those strategies and the way that they should be used are not being followed. The people involved in the videos are clearly under time pressures. They have other factors that are driving their translation, which can mean that they choose unusual or signs which are uncommon to many members of the community. A comment that came up a number of times was that it felt like jumping into cold water, and it took time to engage with the video and fully understand what was being explained. Also, another regular comment was that they were reading the Auslan as if it was an English text without any real understanding of what was being explained. So I've talked about the 5 main problems, but there are 3 findings amongst those. Firstly, the individuals who are working as translators are working in a condition of extreme pressure. So that depends on who is involved, the translation team, the skills within those teams. If the translators are outside of the community, and they say, oh, we've made this video with captions, we just want to add Auslan, can we use one of you to do so? There's pressure if there isn't Auslan on the video, but because the video is already established, it means that the English drives the nature of the Auslan that is used. What it shows is the importance of having a team involved within the translation process. It shouldn't be an onus on one person to do everything. Another problem within the translation process is that there is no quality assurance. We recognize that that wasn't existing in many of those translations. There was no checking. Because it would be useful for somebody who, outside of that translation process and has never seen it before, could have been brought in just as that external eye to check understanding. Moving on to the second finding. English captions are complicated. Most of the videos had fixed open captions alongside the Auslan presenter. So that would mean for the person watching, they wouldn't have a choice in whether they wanted the captions or not. And my skill in understanding the Auslan translation would depend on my understanding of English also. So if an audience member is somebody who is a user of Auslan with a limited repertoire in English, it would be more difficult for them to understand the translation. There was recognition, however, that English captions were important. So again, this translation exercise took place in 2014, and it was clear that translations did not meet the needs of many of the community watching. Those who were watching needed to do two things. They needed to have fluency in both English and Auslan. And secondly, they needed to make sense of a communicative resource that was meshed together. There were lots of things happening at the same time. There was text, there was video, and other visual information. And it didn't reflect what would naturally happen within the community and the naturally emerging repertoires, which meant essentially that it's not fair. So yes, those translations were being created, but who could really access them? Who could really understand them? What these translations did was miss a whole group of people, those people who were not fluent in English and would not be able to access the information. So I've talked about a number of not so complementary things. So let's talk about what worked well. So it's good to talk about the positives. What was important within a translation was when a target audience had been clearly defined and their communicative repertoires had been considered, that their language, what they used, was being reflected. Those clients who want those translations shouldn't add the Auslan to the English in a way that compromises it. It should be a case of advocating for free and dynamic translations, not those that are bedded to the English. and it was felt that SLIANZ should come first and the English should come second. And it was important to expand on concepts and give contextual information, because it may be that it was new information that the audience are not aware of yet, so they needed more explanation. Using examples that were related to the audience's experiences. Also, when you're planning the video, is not to have too much going on at the same time, perhaps to fade visual information in and out so that the person watching knows where to look at any particular time and can relate the translation to the additional information that's given. So in summary, it's about using translation practices, not interpreting practices. And I think that's been the main issue with translation to date, is that interpreting practices have been used in favor of translation practices. But there were, as I say, examples of videos that people found particularly positive. This was created in Melbourne and unfortunately is no longer available online, but it was a video to talk about the Finance Ombudsman Service. And it was about people who had issues with money and they needed more guidance and assistance. So the information in this video was presented as a role play. So it was two deaf women just talking in their kitchen, having a natural two-way conversation. But in that conversation, the information about the Ombudsman was included and people really loved this. There's another example from the UK where the same practice has been followed. This was a video talking about the service Sign Live. And it's talking about using VRS services, but this service was incorporated within the story. So again, a dramatic representation of the service. This kind of translation is not always possible, but it shows where the preference is from the deaf community. So I have 2 or 3 more slides, and then I will pause for a short break. Over the next few minutes, I want to talk about how that research that was undertaken can inform and support interpreting practices. So I'm now going to show you a number of different quotes. Again, these come from the focus group that comprised of deaf people. And this topic came up a lot. Within that group, they also talked about interpreting. So one deaf woman talked about her husband, and she described him as having a different kind of sign language. And if her husband has had an interpreter that is of a too high level for him, he doesn't understand them and is too embarrassed to ask, so I step in to help. I don't like that. And she also said that it was important for her husband to pick the most appropriate interpreter, because if they are too high level, he will later tell me that he was not comfortable and it made him feel embarrassed because he hasn't understood. Many of the deaf people in the group who worked within what we describe in Australia as case managers who are working with a number of different deaf people within a community environment. They talked about working with their deaf clients and having to re-explain everything. And they felt that what they were doing was essentially translation work. So when we consider those quotes in regards to interpreting, and we think about them more fully, I think a lot of the time interpreting is not working for deaf people. And that takes me back to my original provocation at the beginning of my presentation. Is, do we understand other people? And do others truly understand us? I think understanding, of course, exists, but we need to rethink about whether true understanding is taking place. Interpreting practices should consider what is taking place within the deaf translation field and apply that to their work. There's research that has been undertaken in the UK by Christopher Stone, Robert Adam, looking at deaf interpreters particularly, and what is happening within deaf translation, what are the norms that have emerged within the deaf community rather than within an academic setting. How language exists within the community, what is used, and how that can be applied to interpreting. And that raises a number of questions. First of all, who is the audience? What are the skills needed? If somebody is requesting an interpreter, is it more translation that they need? And for the interpreters individually, how can they build their skills and collaborate? The information that needs to be interpreted, don't take it as read, unpack it and explain it as if it's brand new information to the individual. And when you're looking at text or information that does need to be interpreted, consider what's the best order in order to apply that. And also, can we try new things? Why not? This question is in regards to deaf translation practice. A while ago, I sent out a tweet asking about who people liked within the deaf translation field. What's their favorite translation? So different people responded with their thoughts. So there's a list here of responses. I'm just going to change over interpreters while we're in this moment.
So all these people who've responded are deaf and work with translations. The things that people love about translators and translations are being stated here. It's very interesting. What they're doing is naming people. They're identifying the people doing the work, not the work itself. They've mentioned, so here, Nadia Nadaraja, who did a translation of a Shakespeare text. People have acknowledged this as being a really wonderful piece of work on video. And they've identified that piece of work from her. People talk about the clarity, the skills that people are using to create these videos in sign language. So that's really interesting to see. Conversations that are being had about translators and translators' work, and interesting to think about how this can be brought into interpreting practice as well. So it's important to recognize there is expertise in what deaf people can do here. So I've listed the expertise on the slide. You know, flexibility, signing flexibility, the ability to match many people. That's seen as a respected strength. The second point on the slide is about extra-linguistic knowledge. This extra-linguistic knowledge, I think, needs more discussion about what it is. The abbreviation for it is DELK, DELK, Deaf Extra-Linguistic Knowledge. But it's about a prerequisite for working, either as an interpreter or a translator. Perhaps this is a skill that could be brought in by other, used, harnessed by other interpreters. And used by other professionals in the field of interpreting and translation to understand how it can improve quality. Also, how there can be a refocusing back to translation work and deaf translation work, because perhaps it's not viewed equally, and yet it should be. Perhaps it's worth a revisiting and a re-exploring of deaf translation practice, which can inform new interpreting norms. So now to summarize, as I get towards the end of this presentation, I think it's more than fair to say translation and interpreting is hard. Okay? You've chosen a difficult career. The diversity in audiences and colleagues is high. Many of us are still finding our way, but it's important. What we do should be driven by the community's needs. So I've talked about external pressures. I've said that clients can add that pressure. Videos that have open captions add pressures. Maybe what we need to do is keep those pressures at bay and be driven by the community need against those pressures. It's also important to recognize that some of these skills are not well understood. And the important thing with video translations is to consider that they should be natural and clear. Remember the quote from earlier from the focus group: natural, clear, and accurate. Doing that and trying new things and holding that in mind, I think, can bring really good positive changes. So we have opportunity for questions. I can share this guidance as well. There's a download link on the slide, but I can share it with you so that you can download it for yourself. And again, this document is something that could help any of you, all of you, in some different ways. So I'd like to conclude with my greeting. Greetings, greetings, greetings to you all. Many thanks.